I want you to start with a mental image. Just, close your eyes for a second. Imagine you're standing on a street corner in Warsaw. It's a beautiful Sunday, spring of 1943. The sky is that crisp, perfect blue. The wind is warm, maybe carrying the scent of blooming lindens. And right there in the square, there's a carnival, a carousel spinning around, playing this jaunty, kind of mechanical tune. People are laughing. Girls are catching their skirts in the wind. Couples are, flirting. And just beyond that carousel, maybe 50 yards away, there's a wall. And behind that wall, the Jewish ghetto is on fire. The sky isn't blue there. It's black with smoke. And pieces of ash, human ash, debris from people's living rooms are floating down like black snow onto the writers on the carousel.
And that isn't a hypothetical. That's not some, writer's invention. That is the exact scene that was captured in the poem Campo de Fury. And the man watching it, the man standing right there between the laughter and the inferno, scribbling the notes that would become one of the most important poems of the 20th century. That's Czesław Miłosz.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are not just doing a biography of a writer. That's too simple. We're looking at a man whose life is a complete cross-section of the 20th century. If you want to understand the modern world totalitarianism, war, exile, the clash of ideologies, you really don't need a whole stack of history books. You just need to understand this one man.
It really is the ultimate case study, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, we are talking about someone who was born in the Russian Empire before the Tsar even fell. He lived through the Russian Revolution, saw the birth of an independent Poland, survived the entire Nazi occupation,
Right.
witnessed the Soviet takeover of Eastern Europe, defected to the West at the absolute height of the Cold War.
And it doesn't stop there.
No. Then he watches the counterculture explode in Berkeley in the 1960s, and he lives long enough to see the Berlin Wall come down and democracy return to his homeland. It's just, it's the whole century.
It's staggering. It's not like he just read about these things in the paper. He was there. He was a witness. But the thing that really gets me is the contrast. You look at his resume, right? Nobel laureate, righteous among the nations for saving Jews. I mean, a certified hero. But then there's this other part. He was also a diplomat for a communist regime before he defected.
And a reluctant witness, which is maybe the most interesting part.
What do you mean by that?
Well, that's the tension we're really going to explore today. Miłosz didn't want to be a political poet. He wanted to be a poet of nature, of contemplation. He wanted to write about rivers and forests and the metaphysical nature of being. But history, with a capital H, kept grabbing him by the throat and forcing him to look at the ugly stuff.
He wanted to look at the sky, but he was forced to look at the blood in the mud.
That's a perfect way to put it.
So our mission for this deep dive is to try and unpack the toolkit he left for us. Because he didn't just observe, he analyzed. He basically wrote a manual on how the human mind gets seduced by authoritarian ideas. And frankly, in our current age of, information warfare, polarized narratives, echo chambers, that manual is more relevant than ever.
Absolutely. We have a massive stack of sources today. His autobiography, Native Realm, which is incredible. His poetry, obviously, which is the core of his soul. And, of course, The Captive Mind, which is, I think you could argue, the best book ever written on intellectual dishonesty and the seduction of totalitarianism.
So let's start at the very beginning, because usually when we talk about a writer, we can say, oh, he was Polish or she was American. With Miłosz, it's just not that simple. If you asked him where he was from, he wouldn't point to a country on a modern map.
No, not at all. He would say he was a citizen of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania.
Which, for those of us who aren't, experts in Eastern European history, hasn't actually existed for a very, very long time.
Yeah. Oh, deeply, deeply defunct by the time he was born in 1911. But this is absolutely crucial to understanding his psychology. He was born in a place called Etyniai, in what is now the Kėdainiai district of Lithuania.
Yeah.
But the culture he was born into was this very specific borderland mix.
The sources describe it as a place where languages and religions they overlapped, almost seamlessly. You had Polish nobility, Lithuanian peasants, Jewish merchants, Russian administrators. It wasn't this rigid show me your passport kind of world.
Right. It wasn't the kind of ethno-nationalism that we see so much today, where it's Poland is for the Poles or Lithuania is for the Lithuanians. The Grand Duchy identity was about plurality. It was a civic identity, not just an ethnic one. Miłosz grew up speaking Polish, but he was hearing Lithuanian, Yiddish, and Russian every single day. He considered himself a patriot of a vanished country. He actually claimed he had a greater right than Adam Mickiewicz, the great romantic poet, to say, "O Lithuania, my country."
That is a bold claim. I mean, that's like saying you're more American than Walt Whitman or something.
It is, but he felt it in his bones. There's a great detail in the notes about his family tree that really illustrates this. It reads like a United Nations roster of the entire region.
Yeah, let's look at that. His grandfather, Zygmunt Kunat, owned the estate in Atenia. Polish nobility, but not the, wealthy, drinking champagne in Paris kind. This was the squire class, connected to the soil, managing the harvest, hands in the dirt.
And then you have his paternal grandfather, Artur Miłosz, who fought in the 1863 uprising against Russia. So you have rebellion baked into the DNA.
The rebellion against empire, specifically.
Exactly. But then it gets even more mixed. His grandmother was a descendant of the Czesław family, which was of Lithuanian origin. One of her ancestors was a personal secretary to the King of Poland. And his other grandmother was a doctor's daughter from Riga in Latvia, from a German-Polish family, the von Knolls.
And there's even a theory mentioned by his biographer Andrzej Franacek that the name Miłosz comes from Serbian roots way, way back. So he's just a walking melting pot.
He's a child of Europe. And this is why he was so allergic to the narrow nationalism that tore Europe apart later. He couldn't hate the Germans or the Russians or the Jews or the Lithuanians without hating a part of himself or his neighbors. He saw these divisions as, artificial overlays on a much more complex reality.
His childhood, at least at first, sounds almost like a fairy tale. He wrote a novel called The Isa Valley, which memorializes this time. And it's just full of these descriptions of hunting and beekeeping, devils living in the willow trees. It sounds idyllic.
It was an Eden. But like Eden, it had a snake. And the snake was the 20th century. He's born in 1911. By 1914, World War I starts. He's 3 years old. And his expulsion from paradise begins almost immediately.
This is the part of the timeline that just blew my mind. His father was a civil engineer, right?
Yes, Alexander Miłosz. He was drafted into the Imperial Russian Army to build bridges and roads for the troops. And he didn't leave his family behind in the safety of the estate. He took them with him.
Just try to imagine the logistics of that for a second. You're a toddler. You are traveling in what's essentially a wagon train, right behind the front lines of the Great War.
It's a nomadic, terrifying existence. They were in Vilnius when the German army captured it in 1915. Then they retreated with the Russian army deep into Russia itself. They actually crossed Siberia.
To Siberia, as a child.
Yes. The sources track their movement through these vast swaths of the Russian Empire as it was collapsing. I mean, imagine a 6-year-old boy watching the entire Tsarist order just dissolve into anarchy. Then, just as the war ends in 1918, they trek all the way back to their valley in Lithuania thinking, okay, we made it, the nightmare is over. And the Polish-Soviet War breaks out in 1919.
There's that vivid anecdote in his memoir, Native Realm, about being fired upon during this return journey.
Oh, it's a chilling moment. It stayed with him forever. He and his mother are traveling, and Polish soldiers, his own people, theoretically opened fire on their carriage. In the chaos of these border wars, nobody knew who was who. So you have this young boy realizing that identity won't save you. The bullet doesn't check your passport. The bullet doesn't care if you speak Polish. It was a lesson in the absolute fragility of civilization.
It really explains why his later poetry is so focused on how easily things just fall apart. He saw the structures of the world, empires, borders, safety, completely dissolve before he was even 10 years old.
Exactly. He couldn't be a naive romantic because his childhood was defined by the collapse of order. And this followed him right to university. He entered Stefan Batory University in Vilnius in 1929. He studies law, but his heart is in literature. And he co-founds a poetry group.
With a name that I absolutely love, the Catastrophists.
The group itself was called Ugry, which means brushwood or kindling, something that's ready to burn. But the critics, they're the ones who labeled them the Catastrophists. And it wasn't just, teenage angst. It wasn't them wearing black and being moody. It was a kind of prophetic intuition.
What were they prophesying? What did they see coming?
Well, you have to remember the context. It's the early 1930s. Most of Western Europe is trying to pretend everything is fine. The Roaring '20s are over, but people are still hoping for peace. But these students in Wilno, living on the fault line between the rising Soviet Union and a rearming Germany, they could feel the tremors. They just knew.
What was the poetry like?
Dark. Very surreal. Full of apocalyptic imagery. Visions of burning cities, crumbling towers, anthills being destroyed by a careless foot. They weren't writing about unrequited love or flowers. They were writing about the end of civilization. They sensed that the fragile peace of the 1920s was about to shatter, and they were screaming it in verse.
And it wasn't just poetry for Miłosz, right? He wasn't some passive observer hiding in a library. There's a story about him standing up to a mob that I think is really important to understand his character.
This is vital. because Miłosz often accused himself of being too passive later in life, of being too intellectual. But here, as a student, he was incredibly brave. Anti-Semitism was rising in Polish universities, specifically this policy of ghetto benches, where Jewish students were forced to sit separately in lecture halls.
It was segregation, 100%.
It was. And a mob formed to attack Jewish students at the university. Miłosz, who was a distinct physical presence, he was a big guy, thick eyebrows, very intense stare. He physically stepped in.
He threw punches. He got in fight.
He fended off attacks. He defended people. And this wasn't just a shoving match. It was life or death. During that specific riot, a student was killed by a rock thrown at his head. So Miłosz was putting his life on the line to defend these students. He chose a side, and it wasn't the side of the nationalists. It shows that his moral compass was already set against this kind of ethnic hatred.
Around this time, he also travels to Paris and meets a figure who seems to belong to a different century entirely. His cousin, Oskar Miłosz.
Oh, Oskar Miłosz is a deep dive all on his own. He was living in Paris, a diplomat for Lithuania, a French-language poet, but primarily a Swedenborgian mystic.
Swedenborgian, that's esoteric. We probably need to unpack that a little bit.
Extremely esoteric. Emanuel Swedenborg was an 18th century scientist who turned mystic, claimed he could converse with angels, and mapped out the spiritual structure of the entire universe. Oskar was a devotee. And he taught Czesław that the material world, the world of politics, wars, economics, is not the only reality. He introduced him to the idea that there is a spiritual hierarchy, a vertical dimension to life.
So you have this young Czesław Miłosz. On one hand, he's a catastrophist, seeing the political doom coming, the horizontal threats. And on the other, he's an apprentice mystic, learning about the eternal soul, the vertical hope.
And that duality never leaves him. For his entire life, he is always looking at the mud of history with one eye and at the heavens with the other. He refuses to give up either perspective.
Then the catastrophe arrives, September 1st, 1939. Germany invades Poland. The prophecy comes true. Miłosz is in Warsaw, working for Polish radio when the bombs start falling.
The radio station is hit. He joins this huge exodus of refugees fleeing east. He makes it to Laos, then to Bucharest in Romania, and he's safe. This is a really key moment. He's in a neutral country. He has a way out. He could have gone to France or England like thousands of others and just waited out the war.
But he turns around.
He goes back into the fire. And the reason is love. Janina, his future wife, was still in German-occupied Warsaw. He couldn't leave her there.
The route he took back sounds like something out of a spy thriller. I mean, it wasn't like he could just hop on a train.
It's incredible. He's in Bucharest. He needs to get to Warsaw. He gets a Lithuanian identity document. He gets a Soviet visa. He travels by train through the Soviet-occupied zone to Wilno. But just then, Wilno is handed over to Lithuania. Then the Red Army invades Lithuania. He realizes he has to get to the German zone to reach Warsaw. He gets fake papers. He walks a significant portion of the way crossing the green border illegally. He's risking execution by both the Soviets and the Nazis just to get back to Janina.
Talk about a romantic gesture. Honey, I walked through 2 totalitarian regimes to get to you.
And when he finds her, they spend the next 5 years in what he later called the most agonizing spot in the whole of terrorized Europe.
Nazi-occupied Warsaw. It is just so hard for us to truly grasp what that meant.
It wasn't just occupation in the sense of, enemy soldiers on the street. It was a systematic attempt to erase a culture and a people. Schools were closed, publishing was banned, libraries were burned, and then there were the random street roundups, the Opanka. You'd walk out to buy bread, a truck would pull up, soldiers would shove everyone on the street into the back, and you'd be sent to Auschwitz or a forced labor camp. You never knew if you would come home.
So how did he survive? How did he stay sane in that kind of environment?
By working and by resisting. But his resistance was unique. He worked as a janitor at the university library, which gave him access to all these books that were supposed to be locked away or destroyed, and he participated in the cultural resistance.
Right. He translated The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot into Polish, while Warsaw was literally turning into a wasteland.
The resonance is just so powerful. Think of the lines. I will show you fear in a handful of dust. He was seeing that dust every single day. Warsaw was becoming the surreal, fragmented landscape that Eliot had written about. Translating it was a way of making sense of the chaos. He also published a clandestine poetry anthology under the pseudonym Jan Sirich. It was typed on onion skin paper, stapled together. If the Gestapo had found that on him, he would have been shot instantly. But he believed that preserving the language was a form of warfare.
But he did more than just write. We have to talk about his designation as righteous among the nations. This wasn't something that was widely known for a long time, was it?
No. Miłosz didn't like to brag about his heroism. In fact, he often felt guilty that he didn't do more. But the record is clear. His brother, Andres, was very active in the underground, smuggling Jews out of the Vilnius ghetto. Andres brought a Jewish couple, the Trosses, to Warsaw, and Czesław took over from there.
And what did that involve? It wasn't just like opening your door for a night.
Oh no, it involved everything. Finding them a safe apartment in a city where hiding Jews was punishable by death for the entire household, getting them false Aryan papers, bringing them food, paying for their rent. He was their lifeline. He also helped another family, the Łukomieckas, providing money and shelter.
Tragically, the Trosses didn't survive the war in the end. They died during the Warsaw Uprising,
Which was a source of immense pain for Miłosz. But his actions were verified, and Yad Vashem honored him. This experience, though, brings us right back to that image of the carousel that we started with, the proximity of normal life to absolute horror.
That poem, Campo dei Fiori, and another one, A Poor Christian Looks at the Ghetto. They feel different from typical war poetry. They aren't just saying war is hell. They're asking, what does it mean to be a bystander?
Exactly. And A Poor Christian looks at the ghetto. He uses this imagery of a mole burrowing underground, listening to the bodies. He worries that he'll be counted among the helpers of death just because he survived while others died. It's a profound interrogation of survivors' guilt. He isn't patting himself on the back for helping. He's terrified by his own helplessness. He felt that watching the Holocaust changed the very nature of what it means to be human.
Which leads us to maybe the most controversial moment of his war years. August 1944, the Warsaw Uprising. The Polish underground army rises up to take the city back from the Germans. It's the climax of the resistance, and Miłosz, he does not fight.
And this decision haunted his reputation in Poland for decades. You have to understand, the flower of Polish youth, his peers, his friends, they all took up arms. They fought for 63 days against tanks and bombers with barely any weapons. The city was leveled. 200,000 civilians died, and Miłosz stood aside.
Why? I mean, was it cowardice? What was the thinking?
He would say it was realism. He called the uprising a blameworthy, lightheaded enterprise. He looked at the geopolitical map. The Soviet Red Army was waiting right across the river. He knew Stalin wouldn't help. In fact, Stalin wanted the Polish resistance destroyed so he could take over more easily later. Miłosz believed the Polish leadership was sending an entire generation to slaughter for a symbolic gesture that had zero chance of military success.
So he saw it as a suicide mission.
Yes, a beautiful, heroic, but ultimately pointless suicide mission. And he refused to commit suicide. He refused to die for a gesture. But to the families of those who died, that refusal could look like arrogance or betrayal. It's a tension that never fully went away for him.
And he almost got killed anyway, didn't he?
Ironically, yes.
Yeah.
In the chaos of the uprising's collapse, he was rounded up by the Germans and put in a transit camp. He was destined for a concentration camp or a firing squad.
And then a miracle happens.
A literal deus ex machina. A nun, a complete stranger, spots him in the holding area. And she somehow manages to plead with a German officer. She claims he's her relative or someone essential. We don't know exactly what she said, but she talked him out of the line. She saves the life of a future Nobel Prize winner and then just disappeared into history.
That randomness, that you live or die based on the whim of a stranger or the mood of a guard, that seems to be such a core lesson for him.
It stripped him of any belief in a benevolent, orderly universe where good things happen to good people. If you survive that, you can't believe that everything happens for a reason. You survive because of luck. Plain and simple.
So the war ends. Warsaw is a pile of rubble. The Soviets march in and set up a puppet government. And now Miłosz does something that shocks his friends even more than not fighting. He takes a job with the communists.
This is the Faustian bargain. From 1945 to 1951, Czesław Miłosz, the mystic poet who hates totalitarianism, becomes a cultural attaché for the People's Republic of Poland. He gets posted to New York, Washington, D.C., and Paris.
Why? I mean, this is the guy who hated the catastrophe. Why join the people causing it?
It's the question everyone asks. The simple answer is, he wanted to be a Polish writer. He was terrified that if he stayed in exile, he would lose his language, his roots. He thought, maybe I can work for the state without adopting the ideology. Maybe I can help rebuild Polish culture from the inside. He wanted to be printed. He wanted to be read.
He thought he could outsmart the system. He thought he could wear a mask.
He was practicing Hetman.
Okay, we need to stop and define that. This is a concept from the captive mind. It's so, so important. What is Hetman?
Hetman is an Islamic theological concept from Persia that Miłosz adapted. Originally, it referred to a believer hiding their true faith in a hostile environment just to survive. In Miłosz's context, it refers to the practice of paying lip service to the ruling orthodoxy, using the communist slogans, clapping at the speeches, while keeping your true beliefs hidden in your heart.
So it's like high stakes faking it.
It's more than just faking. It's a survival mechanism where you actually derive a secret pleasure from your deception. You smile at the party boss and you think to yourself, I am smarter than you because I am lying to you. Miłosz was practicing Ketman. He thought he could serve the diplomatic corps while remaining intellectually free.
But the mask started to eat into the face.
It always does. You can't live a lie for that long.
Yeah.
The breaking point came in 1949. He visited Poland and saw the reality on the ground. The post-war thaw was completely over. Stalinism was clamping down hard. Friends were being arrested. The socialist realism doctrine was being forced on writers. You couldn't just write a poem about a sunset. It had to praise the tractor drivers and the party.
And his bosses were onto him. They were suspicious.
Oh, yeah. They wrote in a report that he was ideologically totally alien, which, to be fair, he was.
Yeah.
In late 1950, they recalled him to Warsaw and took his passport. He was trapped. He was moments away from being thrown in a cell or just disappearing into the Gulag system.
How did he get out?
He had one friend left in high places, the foreign minister, Zygmunt Modzelewski. Modzelewski intervened and got his passport back, sending him to Paris for one last mission. Miłosz knew it was a one-way trip. He knew if he went back again, he was dead.
So he gets to Paris, January 1951, and he jumps ship.
He goes straight to the headquarters of Kultura, the famous Polish emigre journal run by Jerzy Gitrojk. He just walks in and says, I'm not going back.
And this should be the happy ending, right? Welcome to freedom, Czesław, but it wasn't.
It was a nightmare. The Polish emigre community in London and Paris, they hated him. They said, oh, now you defect. You were happy to drink cocktails in the embassy while our friends were being tortured for the last 5 years. You're an opportunist. They shunned him completely.
And the leftist intellectuals in Paris, Sartre, that whole crowd, they hated him too.
For the exact opposite reason. They were still in love with the Soviet dream. They saw him as a traitor to the revolution. Pablo Neruda, the Chilean poet, wrote this scathing article in a communist paper titled The Man Who Ran Away, just bashing him. He was totally isolated.
And the Americans?
The Americans wouldn't let him in. The McCarran Act was in full swing. Because he had been a diplomat for a communist government, he was flagged as a security risk. So he's stuck in France. His wife and children are in the United States. He's separated from them for years. He actually missed the birth of his second son. He was suicidal.
But in that darkness, in that pressure cooker of isolation, he wrote the book that changed everything, The Captive Mind.
Published in 1953, it is an absolute masterpiece. And here is the key insight for our listeners. This is the toolkit. Miłosz explains that people don't just submit to tyranny out of fear, they submit because of a pill.
The pill of Murtabing.
Right. He borrows this metaphor from a novel by a Polish writer, Stanisław Ignacy Witkiewicz. The pill of Murtabing is a philosophical drug. If you take it, your anxiety vanishes. You stop worrying about the meaning of life or the complexity of the world or all the contradictions. You accept the new faith, which is communism. You become happy, productive, and completely hollow.
It's a metaphor for historical necessity.
Precisely. The intellectual convinces himself that history is a train moving in one direction, towards communism. If you stand on the tracks, you get run over. If you get on the train, you are part of the future. It's seductive. It relieves you of the burden of individual conscience. You don't have to decide what's right or wrong anymore. The party decides for you.
This is the aha moment for me. When you see people today adopting a really rigid ideology, whether it's left or right, and suddenly they have a simple answer for everything, and they treat anyone who disagrees as a dinosaur or a monster, they've taken the pill.
They have. They've traded critical thinking for certainty. And Miłosz shows us how smart people, brilliant people, rationalize this lobotomy. He profiles 4 fellow writers in the book. He calls them Alpha, Beta, Gamma, and Delta to protect their identities, and he dissects how each of them sold their soul to the system, not for money, but for a sense of belonging and historical correctness.
It's a terrifying psychological study, but eventually the West starts to listen. And in 1960, the McCarthyite hysteria dies down enough that the U.S. finally grants him a visa, and he lands in Berkeley, California.
From the frying pan into the hot tub. He arrives in the Bay Area just as the 60s are kicking off.
I cannot imagine the culture shock. He goes from the ruins of Warsaw and the intense intellectual battles of Paris to sunshine and hippies.
He called it the land of Ulro, which is a term he borrowed from the poet William Blake. For Blake, Ulro is the realm of spiritual desolation, of cold science and materialism. To Miłosz, California was terrifyingly flat. No history, no tragedy, just sunshine, supermarkets, and people who are obsessed with their own happiness.
And he got a job teaching at UC Berkeley.
Yes, he got tenure in 2 months, which is just wild. But he felt invisible. Nobody knew who he was. To his colleagues, he was just this grumpy professor of Slavic languages. They had no idea they were having coffee with one of the greatest poets of the century.
And then came the free speech movement, the protests against the Vietnam War. You would think Miłosz, the rebel poet who defied Hitler and Stalin, would love the students rising up against the man.
You would think so. But he despised it. He looked at these students, well-fed, driving cars, free to say whatever they wanted, and he saw spoiled children of the bourgeoisie.
Why was he so hostile to them?
Because he felt they didn't understand the nature of reality. They were playing at revolution. They were waving Mao's little red book around. Miłosz had seen what Mao and Stalin actually did. He had seen the bodies. To him, seeing American kids praising communism was like seeing someone praising cancer because they liked the shape of the tumor. It was obscene to him.
There's that legendary story of him at a rally that I absolutely love.
Oh, it defines the disconnect. A student is giving a speech about universal love and how we just need to love everyone to solve the world's problems. Very flower power. Miłosz, the old professor with the thick accent, grabs the mic and he says, "Talk to me about love when they come into your cell one morning, line you all up and say, you and you step forward. It's your time to die, unless any of your friends loves you so much he wants to take your place."
Boom. I bet you could hear a pin drop in the quad.
Absolute silence. He was bringing the gravity of the 20th century into their fantasy world. He was saying, you think you're free. You have no idea what freedom costs. You have no idea what human beings are capable of when the thin veneer of civilization is removed.
Despite feeling like an alien, he was productive there. He translated Polish poetry into English. He published an anthology, post-war Polish poetry, which actually changed American literature.
It really did. American poets like Robert Haas and W.S. Merwin read this anthology and were just blown away. American poetry at the time was often very personal, very confessional. And here were the Polish poets writing about history, about irony, about the weight of civilization. It injected a seriousness and a historical consciousness into American poetry that it really needed.
And eventually the world caught up to Miłosz. 1980, the Nobel Prize.
It came out of nowhere for most Americans, but the timing was just providential. 1980 was the year that Solidarność was born in the Gdańsk shipyards.
The workers' strikes against the communist government led by Lech Wałęsa.
Exactly. And suddenly Miłosz, who'd been banned in Poland for 30 years, his name couldn't even be printed in newspapers. His books were smuggled in like contraband, was on the front page of every newspaper in the world. He became the spiritual godfather of the revolution.
There's that incredible image of the monument to the fallen shipyard workers in Gdańsk, 3 massive crosses. And on the base, there's a quote from Miłosz.
From his poem, You Who Wronged. The lines are, "Do not feel safe. The poet remembers. You can kill one, but another is born. The words are written down, the deed, the date."
That gives me chills every time I hear it. The poet remembers. It's the ultimate threat to a dictator. You can control the army, you can control the police, but you cannot control memory.
It was a total vindication. The man who refused to fight with a gun in 1944 had provided the ammunition for the final victory in 1980. The word proved stronger than the sword.
He returned to Poland in 1981. It was a hero's welcome, crowds literally carrying him on their shoulders.
He met Lech Wałęsa. He met Pope John Paul II. It was a triumphal return. But, and here's the classic Miłosz twist, he didn't just settle into being a comfortable national statue. He didn't just sit back and accept the applause.
They kept poking the bear.
Right until the very end. After communism fell, he moved back to Krakow. He lived until 2004, aged 93. But even at his funeral, there were protests.
Protests at the funeral of a Nobel laureate and national hero? That's insane.
Right-wing nationalist groups. They held signs calling him anti-Polish and anti-Catholic.
Well, why? On what grounds?
Because he refused to flatter the nation. He criticized Polish anti-Semitism. He criticized the narrow-mindedness of the church. He said that being Polish didn't mean you were automatically a martyr or a saint. He wanted Poland to be open, tolerant, pluralistic, like the Grand Duchy of his childhood. And for the nationalists, who wanted a pure Catholic Poland, that was treason.
It's fitting, really. He started his life as an outsider, a citizen of a lost country. And he ended his life as an outsider, even in his own homeland.
He was always the man in the middle, between East and West, between faith and heresy, between the carousel and the ghetto. He never let himself get comfortable in any single camp.
So let's try to bring this all home. We've told the story, but what's the philosophical core? If you, the listener, take one thing away from Miłosz's worldview, what should it be?
I think it's the rejection of the grand narrative in favor of the specific individual human life. Miłosz wrestled his whole life with the Hegelian idea that history justifies suffering, that breaking a few million eggs is okay if you make a glorious socialist omelet. And he concluded, no, the terror of a single child outweighs the entire Hegelian dialectic. He champions the individual against the system every single time.
And his religious view, you mentioned he was kind of a strange Catholic.
He was practically a Manichaean.
Can you define that for us?
Manichaeism is this ancient worldview that sees the material world as being ruled by dark forces, by a demon, not by a benevolent God. Miłosz looked at nature animals eating each other, the sheer brutality of survival, and he saw evil. He looked at history, the 20th century, and he saw the demon at work. But, and this is the beautiful, crucial part, he refused to give up on wonder. Yes, or ecstasy. He loved the world, the simple things. Vodka, herring, the smell of jam being made, the color of a river at sunset. He believed that despite the devil ruling the world, there were these moments of grace where you could glimpse the eternal. His poetry is this constant battle to praise the world, even though he knows, deep down, it's a slaughterhouse.
There's a line from his poetry cycle, The World, that comes to mind. Faith is in you whenever you look at a dewdrop or a floating leaf, and know that they are because they have to be.
And that cycle was written in 1943, in Warsaw. While people were being rounded up and shot in the streets, Miłosz was writing these deceptively simple poems about children seeing a bear in a picture book, or his father fixing a lamp. He was building a fortress of innocence in the middle of hell. And I think that's his legacy. You don't ignore the evil, you look it right in the eye. But you do not let it consume your capacity for beauty.
Czesław Miłosz, the witness who remembered.
And the poet who refused to take the pill.
If you want to dive deeper into this, The Captive Mind is the place to start. I promise you, it will change how you watch the news. Or just read the World poems. They are short, they are simple, and they are heartbreakingly beautiful.
I couldn't recommend them more. They're an antidote to so much.
That's it for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.